of a lot of the things in ACT that we do tend to be or can be abstract, and maybe that's a quality of not being skilled at delivering it, but it's also sometimes abstract in the sense that it's not what the clients are expecting, because they have sort of a sense of what they think therapy will be or
Right.
how it will work. And I'm curious, how you have tackled that, particularly in sort of, unique settings, like whether it's doing a talk or working with a college student. Is that something that you run into and put any thought into?
Absolutely. Because ACT was developed by some real word nerds, people like Steve Hayes and Kelly Wilson. They are really interested in language, and they are really interested in ideas. And it's this hilarious irony, especially Steve, who can be one of the wordiest guys, around, that he created a whole therapy which is about undermining the power of language, but that uses language to undermine the power of language. So there I've just gotten into the abstract pretty hard. What I try to do is make the ACT work I do as experiential as possible, so that I'm not trying to explain a concept. I'm helping people have the experience I'm going after with them long before we ever talk about it. So I'm a big fan of exercises like tug of war with a monster, where you've got, for those who might be new to this, it's an exercise where you've got a rope, and I, as a therapist, say, like, I'm this thing that you're trying to stay away from. Maybe it's the anxiety you identified or the guilt that you struggle with. And let's see what it's like to be in this tug of war, and then help them get to a point experientially, not because I told them, that the alternative to this war, which turns out to be unwinnable, is to let go of the rope. Not as a new control or strategy where you win, but just like, we're just getting out of the game of fighting. Almost everyone I've done that with was able to kind of get in their body, because they felt the difference between pulling and letting go, that there's something different about what we're going after. And so then that gives me this opportunity to say, so that acceptance in the therapy that we're doing, acceptance and commitment therapy, that's what I'm talking about. Notice that the monster of anxiety or guilt did not go away, but you were different in the face of that monster. And so that's kind of all the instruction I need to give, because it's been instructed through experience. Now, I don't want to pretend that it always goes perfectly, or sometimes exercises don't fail, because they do. But I've tried not to explain concepts very much, and I've tried to use plain language as simply as possible, and like stick to the easiest metaphors to understand. And if I discover that I cannot deliver a metaphor, I'm not going to do it. Like, there are many instances early in my ACT career where I just butchered the man in the hole, and I just don't do the man in the hole. It's just not in my repertoire anymore. So, I just use the ones that I find that work, that I can sell. And more, as I develop as an ACT therapist, I do my best to kind of let metaphors emerge from the work, the metaphors that the clients naturally bring in, and kind of me underscore those and kind of hold those up as ways to kind of help shape their behavior in new ways.
So I think it's really interesting, because you and I, in a previous conversation, realized that we went to what back then was called a 2-day Stephen Hayes experiential ACT workshop that I think it was your first. It was definitely my first big exposure. I'd read a book or two at that point, and that was quite a few years ago. At any rate, I was really inspired by, in some ways, the thing that inspired me about ACT, a lot of which is sort of consistent with social work values, was sort of how the CBS, let's say, principles and values were sort of inherent in this, in the way that you do ACT. But anyway, having said that, I probably did 7 years of ACT where I was not doing what you were describing. I was not being experiential, and I was explaining. The interesting thing that I will say is, while I don't feel proud of that, I think that a lot of my clients got something out of it. So it wasn't completely, wrong or useless. But I also, it took me that long. I just say this for anybody else that's sort of struggling with this. It took me that long to really sort of recognize that doing experiential exercises and worrying about how the client sort of, experiences it and what judgments they might make about me was really frightening to me. I avoided it for a really long time. But I think that ACT helped me to, recognize that and to become willing to start to do those things. But I would say that it's still really scary for me. And that my tendency is to want to be in my comfort zone with that wordiness.
That's so interesting. And I think I can see that people I train sometimes mistake my enthusiasm for experiential exercises for this is how ACT is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. I teach a class on ACT at the School of Social Work here in Little Rock, and just a couple weeks ago I showed a clip of Kirk Strazel on the ACT in Action DVD series, and it's like always the go-to clip I show, because Kirk doesn't do any formal experiential anything, though he definitely gets the client in contact with her thoughts and feelings. And he does it just through this gentle talking and asking these really nice questions and putting out these hypotheses about what she might be experiencing, and then nudging her gently in the direction of new behavior. And so whenever I talk about experiential stuff, I also want to say what moves the processes is what moves the processes. It's not the technique you use.